Admiral Janet Cross stood on the bridge of her flagship Indomitable and watched the largest enemy fleet in galactic history move toward Proxima Centauri. The Council had finally decided to end the Earth Alliance once and for all. 300 ships from 12 different Council species had gathered to crush the human colony and send a message to the rest of the galaxy. Admiral, Commander Nicole Torres reported from her station on the cruiser Liberty. Council fleet is maintaining standard attack formation. They have us outnumbered 3-1. Janet looked at her own fleet. 100 ships built by 5 different species, crewed by beings who had been thrown away by the galaxy. 6 months ago, most of these people had never worked together. Now they were about to face the combined might of the Galactic Council. All ships, this is Admiral Cross, she announced over the fleet communication system. Today we do not just fight for Earth or for our colonies. We fight for every species that has been told they do not belong. We fight for every world that has been called incompatible with galactic peace. We fight for the right to be different. The response came back in a dozen different languages, but the meaning was the same in all of them. They were ready. The Council fleet was impressive to look at. The ships were large and powerful, arranged in perfect geometric formations that had been used successfully for hundreds of years. At the center was the flagship Concordia, a massive vessel that carried the Council's supreme military commander, Fleet Admiral Zenth of the Hegemony species. Admiral Cross had studied Zenth's tactics for months. He was considered one of the greatest military minds in Council history. His fleets had never lost a major battle. He fought with precision, honor, and overwhelming force. He was exactly the kind of enemy that traditional military thinking said could never be defeated. But the Earth Alliance did not use traditional military thinking. Commander Torres, Admiral Cross said into her communicator, activate the new communication jamming system. Let's see how well they coordinate when they cannot talk to each other. On board the Liberty, Nicole Torres smiled as she activated Dr. Miller's latest creation. The jamming system used ethereal energy manipulation to create interference patterns that no Council technology could penetrate. Within seconds, the enemy fleet's communication network went silent. The effect was immediate and devastating. Council ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly began to drift out of position. Orders that should have taken seconds to transmit now took minutes to relay by backup systems. The enemy fleet was still dangerous, but they were no longer fighting as one unified force. Phase 1 complete, Torres reported. Enemy coordination is down to 30% effectiveness. Begin Phase 2, Admiral Cross ordered. All units execute scattered strike. What happened next had never been seen in galactic warfare before. The Alliance fleet did not charge forward in a straight line like traditional tactics demanded. Instead, they used their faster-than-light jump capability to appear throughout the Council formation simultaneously. Human destroyers materialized directly behind enemy battleships, targeting their engine systems with precision strikes. Kithara fighters appeared inside the enemy formation, moving too fast for the larger Council ships to target effectively. Drakmor heavy cruisers jumped to positions where their superior armor could protect smaller Alliance vessels while their weapons pounded enemy shields. The Council fleet found themselves fighting a battle they could not understand. Enemies appeared and disappeared faster than their targeting computers could track. Their own ships were scattered and isolated, unable to provide mutual support. Traditional formations that had worked for centuries were suddenly useless. But the real shock came when the ethereal ships began their attack. The energy beings could phase their vessels partially out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to hit, while still allowing them to fire their weapons. Council ships found themselves being attacked by enemies that seemed to exist and not exist at the same time. Admiral Zenth, commanding the Concordia, tried desperately to regain control of the battle. His flagship was the most powerful vessel in the Council fleet, armed with weapons that could destroy planets. But power meant nothing if you could not hit your target. All ships formed defensive circle around the flagship, Zenth ordered through the backup communication system. It was a reasonable tactical decision that should have protected his most important vessels. Admiral Cross had expected exactly this response. Commander Torres now. Torres activated the second part of Dr. Miller's communication system. Instead of just jamming enemy signals, it now broadcast false orders throughout the Council fleet. Ships that thought they were receiving orders from Admiral Zenth were actually following directions from the Alliance. The result was chaos. Half the Council fleet tried to form a defensive circle while the other half, following false orders, began aggressive attacks on empty space. Enemy ships collided with each other as they tried to follow contradictory commands. The most organized military force in galactic history turned into a confused mob in less than an hour. Captain Sam Watson, commanding the Alliance destroyer Freedom, found himself facing 3 Council battleships that had been separated from their fleet. In normal circumstances, his single ship would have been destroyed in minutes, but these were not normal circumstances. "All Alliance vessels, this is Freedom," Watson broadcast on the secure channel. "I have 3 big ones cut off from their friends. Could use some help here." Within minutes, Watson had support from a Cathera attack squadron, 2 Drakmor heavy fighters, and an ethereal scout ship. The 3 Council battleships, designed to fight other large vessels in organized formations, had no defense against this coordinated swarm attack. The battle raged for 18 hours, but the outcome became clear much earlier. The Council fleet, for all their power and numbers, could not adapt to an enemy that refused to fight by established rules. They were like chess masters trying to play against opponents who had changed the game entirely. The end came when Admiral Zenth himself requested a direct communication with Admiral Cross. The proud hegemony commander appeared on Cross's view screen, his alien features showing confusion and something that might have been respect. "Admiral Cross," Zenth said in his translated voice, "my fleet surrenders. But I must ask, how did you defeat us? Our ships are more powerful. Our numbers were greater. Our tactics have been successful for centuries." Janet Cross looked at the alien commander with genuine sympathy. "Admiral Zenth, you fought as separate species following a single doctrine, trying to impose order on chaos. We fought as something new, something that has learned to use chaos as a weapon. You remained what you always were. We became what we needed to be." The victory at Proxima Centauri sent shockwaves across the galaxy. News of the impossible defeat spread through secret communication networks to every world where the Council's authority was questioned. Suppressed species saw that the mighty Council fleet could be beaten. Marginalized colonies began to declare their independence. The rigid order that had maintained galactic peace for centuries started to crack like old ice under pressure. On Earth, crowds gathered in every major city to watch the news broadcasts. Children who had grown up during the isolation saw images of human ships flying alongside alien vessels in victory formation. The planet that had been cast out by the galaxy was now leading a revolution that would change everything. But Admiral Cross knew this was only the beginning. The Council would not accept this defeat quietly. They would gather every ship they could find and come back with overwhelming force. The real test of the Earth Alliance was still ahead. However, something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The outcasts had proven they could not only survive but thrive together. More importantly, they had shown that there was an alternative to the Council's way of doing things. Change was coming to the galaxy, whether the Council wanted it or not. Chris Wagner had never expected to stand in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council again. 3 years ago, he had been banned from this place along with every other human diplomat. Now he walked through the massive doors as the official representative of the Earth Alliance, followed by delegates from 19 different species that had joined humanity's cause. The council chambers on the neutral world of Concordia were the most impressive buildings Chris had ever seen. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into shadows, and the walls were covered with symbols from every known civilization in the galaxy. 47 different species had seats in the circular chamber, though many of those seats were empty today. As Chris walked to the center of the chamber, he could feel thousands of eyes watching him. Some showed curiosity, others anger, and a few showed something that might have been fear. The human who had been cast out of galactic civilization was back, and he was not alone. Behind Chris walked Captain Vex of the Kythera, her silver skin gleaming under the chamber lights. Beside her was Scalesinger Grex of the Drakmor, his reptilian features calm but alert. Whisper of Stars floated near them, the ethereal's energy form shifting between different colors as it communicated with beings only it could see. But the most significant presence was the group of former council members, who now stood with the Alliance. 3 entire species had withdrawn from the council after the Battle of Proxima Centauri. 7 more had declared their intention to open diplomatic relations with Earth. Even among the remaining council members, there were clear divisions as younger representatives questioned their government's positions. The session moderator was an ancient being called a sage, whose species was older than the council itself. The sage had lived for thousands of years and had seen civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. When the chamber finally fell silent, the ancient being spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Representative Wagner," the sage said, using translation technology to make the words understandable to every species present, "you have requested to address this council. You come here not as a supplicant seeking readmission to our order, but as a representative of something new. Speak your words." Chris took a deep breath and looked around the chamber. These beings had once judged humanity too dangerous for galactic civilization. They had isolated Earth and scattered human colonies across the galaxy. But the outcasts they had created had become something stronger than any of them had imagined. "Honored representatives," Chris began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "I stand before you as the voice of a new kind of galactic civilization. For too long, this galaxy has been governed by the principle of conformity. Species that did not fit the approved model were suppressed, marginalized, or expelled. Entire ways of life were deemed incompatible with galactic peace." A murmur went through the chamber. Several council members began to stand in protest, but the sage raised a hand for silence. Chris continued, "But what kind of peace requires the silencing of diversity? What kind of civilization grows stronger by casting out those who think differently?" Behind him, holographic displays activated, showing images from the worlds of the Earth Alliance. Humans and Kythera working together to build new cities, Drakmor engineers teaching human students advanced metallurgy, ethereal beings collaborating with human scientists on projects that neither species could have achieved alone. "The Earth Alliance does not seek to replace the Council," Chris explained as the images shifted to show their technological achievements. Weapons that combined the best of multiple species, ships that moved through space in ways that defied old understanding of physics, art and music that blended the cultures of a dozen different worlds. "We offer an alternative, a place where being different is celebrated rather than feared. A civilization where survival depends on adaptation, rather than submission to a single way of thinking." The response was immediate and dramatic. As Chris spoke, delegates from 3 more council species announced their withdrawal from the organization. The representative from the Zilani people, who had been among the first to turn against humanity, stood and declared that their government had been wrong to support the isolation decree. "The humans showed us what we could become when we worked together instead of apart," the Zilani delegate said. "We have learned more about ourselves in 3 years of cooperation with the Alliance than in 3 centuries under Council authority." But the most powerful moment came when the Nexari trade delegate stood up. The Nexari had been the last allies to abandon humanity, and their support of the Council's economic policies had made the isolation possible. The Council promised that casting out humanity would bring stability and prosperity, the Nexari said, their translator giving their words a musical quality. "Instead, we have seen stagnation and fear. The Alliance worlds are not just surviving without us. They are thriving. They are innovating. They are growing." Meanwhile, Council space has become a place where new ideas are discouraged and change is feared. From her position on the flagship Terran Dream, Admiral Helen Carter watched the political earthquake that was reshaping the galaxy. Intelligence reports were coming in from across Council space. Uprisings on worlds where local populations demanded to join the Alliance. Military units refusing orders to enforce the isolation decree. Trade routes being abandoned as merchants sought the more profitable Alliance markets. Admiral, her communications officer, reported, "We are receiving formal requests for Alliance membership from 12 new systems just today. Our diplomatic corps cannot keep up with the demand." Helen smiled as she looked at the tactical display showing Alliance territory. What had started as a small collection of refugee camps around Earth had grown into something that covered a significant portion of the galaxy. And it was still growing. But the real change was not in territory or politics. It was in the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. The Alliance had proven that different species could work together as equals, that diversity made civilizations stronger rather than weaker, and that progress came from embracing change rather than preventing it. Back in the council chambers, the final speaker was taking the floor. The sage, whose species had founded the original Galactic Council thousands of years ago, slowly rose from their position at the center of the chamber. "I have lived for 8,000 years," the ancient being said, their voice carrying the weight of eons. "I have seen civilizations rise and fall, watched the galaxy change in ways that would astonish the young. Today, I have seen something I thought impossible: the evolution of galactic civilization itself." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the translation systems seemed to pause, as if they were processing words too important to rush. The council was created to bring peace through unity. But true unity cannot be achieved through force, and peace built on suppression is no peace at all. The humans and their allies have shown us something we had forgotten: that strength comes from diversity, and that civilization advances not through conformity, but through the courage to embrace change. 1 year later, Captain Rachel Green stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, the massive diplomatic hub that had been built in the neutral space between Council territory and the Alliance. Through the viewport, she could see ships from dozens of species docking at the station, not just Alliance members and former Council species, but new civilizations that had emerged from the far edges of the galaxy, drawn by stories of a place where differences were celebrated. The galaxy was changing, becoming something richer and more complex than anyone had imagined. The Council still existed, but it was no longer the only option for galactic civilization. The Alliance had proven that there was another way, and that proof was spreading across the stars like a wave of hope. Dr. Charles Webb joined Rachel at the viewport as a particularly exotic ship approached the station. Its hull seemed to shift between dimensions, clearly built by a species that understood physics in ways that even Alliance scientists were still learning. "First contact with our 53rd new species this month," he observed with wonder in his voice. "At this rate, we will need to expand the station again." Rachel smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought humanity from galactic exile to the center of a new age of exploration and cooperation. "Earth opened its arms to the Forsaken," she said. "Now the Forsaken are opening the galaxy to everyone." In the distance, Sol's light still shone, no longer the star of an isolated world, but the heart of a civilization that had learned the most human lesson of all. Sometimes, being cast out is just the first step toward finding where you truly belong. War Chieftain Graktor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, watching the stars bend and twist as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 47 ships materialized in the darkness around Kepler 442b, their black hulls bristling with weapons that had conquered 17 star systems. The Korthak Empire had come to claim another prize. Graktor was a veteran of 100 battles, his thick gray skin covered in ritual scars that told the story of his victories. Each mark represented a world conquered, a species enslaved, a civilization ground beneath the iron boot of Korthak superiority. He had been fighting for 30 years, ever since he was old enough to hold a plasma rifle, and he had never met an enemy he couldn't break. "Report," he growled to his tactical officer. "The research station is directly ahead, exactly where our intelligence indicated," the officer replied. "No sign of military vessels, no defensive platforms. The readings suggest it's exactly what it appears to be, a scientific outpost with minimal defenses." Graktor smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. The Villani were known throughout this sector as peaceful researchers, creatures so soft they had never even developed proper weapons. This would be easier than he had expected. His ships could probably take the station without firing a shot. But as the fleet moved deeper into the system, something appeared on the sensors that made Graktor pause. 4 ships were positioned between his fleet and the research station. They were smaller than his battleships, but there was something about their design that bothered him. These vessels looked different from anything he had seen before. "Unknown contacts," his sensor operator announced. 4 vessels of unfamiliar configuration. "They appear to be waiting for us." "Waiting?" Graktor studied the tactical display. The 4 ships were arranged in a defensive formation, but they weren't hiding behind the station or calling for help. They were just sitting there in open space as if they had all the time in the world. "What species do they belong to?" "Unknown, War Chieftain. The computer has no match for their design in our databases." Graktor felt a moment of uncertainty. In 30 years of conquest, he had learned to recognize every major ship type in the galaxy. Pirates, merchants, military vessels, he knew them all. But these 4 ships were completely new to him, and that was troubling. Still, they were only 4 ships against his 47. Whatever species they represented, they were clearly either suicidal or too stupid to understand the odds they faced. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. "Let's see what these fools want." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the lead enemy vessel. What Graktor saw there made him take a step backward in surprise. The creature looking back at him was unlike any species he had encountered. It was smaller than a Korthak warrior, with pale pink skin and dark hair covering the top of its skull. But what caught Graktor's attention was the scar running down the left side of its face, the mark of a survivor, someone who had seen real combat and lived to tell about it. More disturbing was the way this creature carried itself. It sat perfectly still in its command chair, hands folded in front of it, staring directly at Graktor with eyes that showed no fear whatsoever. Behind it, the bridge crew moved with quiet efficiency, checking weapons and scanning displays as if preparing for battle was as routine as breathing. "I am War Chieftain Graktor of the Korthak Empire," he announced, letting his voice carry all the authority of his rank. "You are trespassing in space that now belongs to us. Identify yourselves and explain your presence here." The creature's expression didn't change. When it spoke, its voice was calm and level, as if they were discussing the weather instead of facing an imminent battle. "Commander Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Coalition. You're in human-protected space now. Turn around and leave. This is your only warning." Graktor felt his jaw drop. Human-protected space. He had never heard of any species called humans, and the idea that 4 small ships could protect anything from his entire fleet was absurd. The creature had to be bluffing, trying to buy time for reinforcements that would never come. "Earth Defense Coalition," he repeated, letting amusement creep into his voice. "I have never heard of this Earth. Is it some insignificant mining world? A failed colony, perhaps?" "Earth is our home," Morrison replied simply. "And right now, that's all you need to know about it. You have 60 seconds to begin your withdrawal from this system." The sheer audacity of it made Graktor laugh out loud. This human thought it could give ultimatums to a Korthak war chieftain. The creature had no idea who it was dealing with. Graktor had crushed species with fleets 10 times larger than these 4 pathetic ships. "You amuse me, human," he said, still chuckling. "Perhaps I will keep you alive as a pet when this is over. You can entertain my officers with your bold words while your people serve as slaves in our mining colonies." Something flickered in Morrison's eyes at the mention of slaves, but his voice remained steady. 45 seconds. Graktor's amusement began to fade. This creature was either completely insane or knew something he didn't. He glanced at his tactical display again. 4 ships, 47. The math was simple enough that even a child could understand it. "You think 4 ships can stand against my entire fleet?" he asked. "I have battleships that could crack planets. I have more firepower in my forward guns than most species possess in their entire military." 30 seconds, Morrison said. Behind the human commander, a female officer looked up from her console. "All weapons are locked on target, sir. We have firing solutions for their entire fleet." Graktor felt his blood begin to boil. These humans were treating him like some minor pirate captain instead of the conqueror of star systems. His ritual scars itched with the memory of old battles, and his hands clenched into fists as rage built in his chest. "I am Graktor the Destroyer," he snarled. "I have burned worlds and enslaved millions. I have torn apart fleets larger than yours with my bare hands. What makes you think you can threaten me?" Morrison's expression finally changed. The calm mask slipped for just a moment, and Graktor saw something underneath that made his skin crawl. It was the look of a predator, not just any predator, but an apex predator that had never known defeat. "Because," Morrison said quietly, "you've never fought humans before." The connection ended, leaving Graktor staring at a blank screen. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders, their hands hovering over weapon controls. The war chieftain felt a strange sensation in his stomach, something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Was it possible that he was actually nervous? He shook his head, dismissing the ridiculous thought. 4 ships against 47. The humans had sealed their own fate with their arrogance. "All ships attack formation," he commanded. "Target the human vessels first. I want them destroyed quickly so we can get on with the real business of taking this station." His fleet began to move, 47 warships accelerating toward the 4 human vessels that waited motionless in space. Graktor settled back in his command throne, already planning how he would divide the spoils of victory. The Villani research station would provide valuable slaves, and their crystalline technology might prove useful to the Empire. As for the humans, he would make sure to capture at least a few alive. Any species arrogant enough to challenge the Korthak Empire deserved to spend their final years learning proper respect in the slave pits. The distance between the fleets closed rapidly. Graktor watched his forward ships spread out into attack formation, their weapon systems powering up for the opening salvo. Soon, the 4 human ships would be nothing but expanding clouds of plasma and debris. Firing range in 30 seconds, his tactical officer announced. Graktor leaned forward in his chair, eager to watch the destruction of the arrogant humans. But as he studied his tactical display, something made him pause. The 4 enemy ships were still not moving. They sat perfectly still in space as if they were waiting for something. 20 seconds to firing range. Still the humans didn't move. Graktor found himself gripping the arms of his throne tighter than necessary. What were they planning? Did they have some kind of secret weapon? Some alliance he didn't know about? 10 seconds. The human ship suddenly came to life. All 4 vessels moved at once, accelerating so quickly that Graktor's sensors could barely track them. They split apart like a flower opening, each ship taking a different vector as they closed the distance to his fleet. All ships, fire at will, Graktor roared. The space between the fleets exploded with energy beams and missile trails. His 47 ships unleashed everything they had at the 4 human vessels, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But somehow, impossibly, the humans were no longer where his weapons were aimed. They moved like living things, twisting and turning through space with an agility that should have been impossible for ships of their size. And as they danced between his attacks, they began to return fire. The first human weapon that hit his fleet was unlike anything Graktor had ever seen. Instead of the energy beams or missiles he expected, it was a solid projectile moving at incredible speed. The railgun round punched through the shields of the destroyer Thunderstrike as if they weren't even there, tearing the ship apart from the inside. The UES Vengeance moved through space like a hunting shark, its dark hull absorbing the light from distant stars. As it dove into the heart of the Korthak formation, Commander Morrison sat perfectly still in his command chair, watching the tactical display as enemy ships closed in around them. To most beings, being outnumbered 12-1 would be cause for panic. To humans who had learned to fight on a world that tried to kill them every day, it was just another Tuesday. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, Lieutenant Sullivan called out from her station. Korthak heavy cruiser attempting to flank us. I see it, Morrison replied. Rodriguez, give them something to think about. Sergeant Rodriguez's fingers danced over his weapons console with the practiced ease of someone who had been in 100 battles. The Vengeance's main railgun swiveled toward the approaching cruiser and fired. The solid metal slug, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the enemy's shields and armor like they were made of paper. The Korthak ship exploded in a brilliant flash, its reactor containment failing as the railgun round tore through its engine compartment. Debris scattered in all directions, some of it slamming into nearby enemy vessels and causing even more damage. Morrison barely glanced at the destruction. 1 down, 46 to go. Sullivan, bring us around to heading 180. Johnson, I need more power to the forward shields. Pushing the reactors to 105%, Chief Engineer Johnson reported from the engine room. She's running hot, but she'll hold. The Vengeance rolled and accelerated, dodging a massive barrage of plasma bolts from 3 Korthak destroyers. The enemy weapons were powerful enough to melt through most ship armor, but they were also slow and predictable. Human ships had been designed to fight in the chaotic environment of Earth's orbital battles, where debris fields and electromagnetic storms made conventional tactics useless. Behind them, the UES Liberty and UES Freedom worked in perfect coordination, their movements synchronized like a dance that had been practiced for years. The 2 destroyers moved through the enemy formation like wolves hunting in a pack, striking at weak points and then disappearing before the Korthak could mount an effective counterattack. Captain Steve Parker of the Liberty had been fighting alongside Morrison for 5 years. His ship specialized in electronic warfare, using advanced jamming systems to blind enemy sensors while his weapons picked off confused targets. The Korthak had never faced anything like it. Liberty to vengeance, Parker's voice crackled over the communication system. We've got 6 enemy ships locked onto our position. Requesting support. Freedom is moving to assist, replied Captain Linda Hayes from the 3rd ship. Her vessel was smaller than the Liberty, but carried experimental weapons that Earth's military had been eager to test in real combat. Deploying hunter-killer drones now. A swarm of small robotic fighters poured out of the Freedom's launch bays, each one no larger than a shuttle but packed with enough explosive power to cripple a cruiser. The drones moved with inhuman precision, weaving between enemy ships and striking at vulnerable points that larger vessels couldn't reach. War Chieftain Graktor watched from his flagship as his carefully planned formation began to fall apart. The humans fought like nothing he had ever encountered. They didn't follow standard military doctrine. They didn't form defensive lines or concentrate their firepower in massive volleys. Instead, they moved like individual predators, each ship acting independently while somehow maintaining perfect coordination with the others. "How many have we lost?" he demanded. 12 ships destroyed, 7 more heavily damaged, his tactical officer reported. The humans are using weapons we've never seen before. Some kind of kinetic projectiles that bypass our shields entirely. 12 ships. In the first 10 minutes of battle, these 4 human vessels had destroyed almost a quarter of his fleet. Graktor felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized this wasn't going to be the easy victory he had expected. "All ships, concentrate fire on the largest human vessel," he ordered. "Focus everything we have on that one target." 23 Korthak warships turned their weapons toward the UES Vengeance. The space around Morrison's ship lit up with energy, beams and missile trails as the enemy poured everything they had into destroying the human flagship. But the Vengeance was no longer where their weapons were aimed. Morrison had seen the attack, coming long before it arrived. Years of fighting in Earth's brutal orbital wars had taught human commanders to read enemy intentions like a book. He ordered evasive maneuvers just as the enemy barrage reached their position, and the ship twisted away from the incoming fire with movements that should have been impossible for something so large. "Return fire," Morrison said calmly. All batteries, the Vengeance unleashed its full arsenal. Railgun rounds tore through enemy hulls while missile swarms overwhelmed their point defenses. Energy weapons designed to function in the electromagnetic chaos around Earth cut through Korthak's shields like hot knives through butter. 3 more enemy ships died in the first salvo. Aboard the research station, Dr. Zethara and the Villani watched the battle with growing amazement. They had expected the humans to put up a brave fight before being overwhelmed by superior numbers. What they were seeing instead was a systematic destruction of the entire Korthak fleet. "How are they doing this?" Elder Morthak whispered, his crystalline form pulsing with disbelief. Zethara studied the tactical readings her sensors were providing. The human ships moved with a coordination that spoke of countless hours of training together. But more than that, they fought with a vicious creativity that her peaceful people could barely comprehend. As she watched, the UES Freedom used the wreckage of destroyed Korthak ships as cover, hiding behind the debris field while launching attacks from unexpected angles. The Liberty had somehow managed to hack into enemy communication systems, feeding false orders that sent Korthak ships crashing into each other. And through it all, the Vengeance carved a path of destruction through the center of the enemy formation like an unstoppable force of nature. The 4th human ship, the Constitution, had been holding back until now. Captain Lisa Barnes had positioned her heavy cruiser at the edge of the battle, watching for the moment when she could make the greatest impact. That moment came when a group of Korthak troop transports tried to break away from the main battle and head for the research station. These ships carried the warriors who were supposed to capture the Villani and turn them into slaves. Barnes wasn't about to let that happen. "All ahead full," she ordered. Ramming speed. Her crew didn't question the order. They had all grown up on Earth, where the concept of sacrifice for the greater good was taught from childhood. If their captain said ramming speed, then ramming speed it was. The Constitution accelerated toward the fleeing transports, its engines pushing far beyond their normal limits. The Korthak ships tried to turn and fight, but they were designed for landing troops, not engaging enemy warships. Barnes's heavy cruiser tore through them like a bullet through tissue paper, but the Constitution had taken heavy damage in the charge. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space, and her reactor was beginning to overload. Barnes looked around her bridge at her crew, men and women who had followed her through a dozen battles and never once let her down. "All hands. This is the captain. she announced over the ship's communication system. "We've taken critical damage and reactor containment is failing. Escape pods are standing by for anyone who wants to use them." Nobody moved toward the escape pods. Her crew remained at their stations, hands steady on their controls, ready to follow their captain wherever she led them. Barnes smiled. This was why humans had survived on the most dangerous world in the galaxy. When the situation was impossible, when the odds were hopeless, they didn't give up. They found a way to win. "In that case," she said, "let's make this count. Target that Korthak dreadnought. We're going to introduce them to a human tradition called ramming speed." The Constitution changed course one final time, aiming directly for Graktor's flagship. The Korthak war chieftain watched in horror as the human ship accelerated toward him, its hull glowing red from internal fires, but its weapons still firing. At the last moment, Barnes triggered the Constitution's reactor overload. The ship disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire that engulfed 3 Korthak vessels, including the Bone Crusher. War Chieftain Graktor had just enough time to realize that he had made a terrible mistake before the explosion consumed his flagship. When the light faded, only 3 human ships remained, but they had destroyed over half of the Korthak fleet. The surviving enemy vessels, leaderless and demoralized, began to retreat toward the edge of the system. Morrison opened a communication channel to the fleeing ships. His voice was cold as the vacuum of space. "Tell your empire what happened here today. Tell them what happens when you threaten beings under human protection. And tell them that if they ever come back, we won't be so merciful next time." The 3 remaining Korthak ships jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of their defeat back to their masters. Behind them, the debris field that had once been their fleet drifted silently through space, a monument to the price of underestimating the species that had learned to fight on a death world called Earth. The silence that followed the battle was almost as shocking as the battle itself. Where moments before space had been filled with the flash of weapons and the explosions of dying ships, now there was only the quiet drift of debris and the soft hum of the 3 remaining human vessels as they moved through the wreckage. Commander Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, looking out at the field of destroyed Korthak warships. 47 enemy vessels had arrived to conquer and enslave. Only 3 had escaped to tell the tale. The mathematics of the victory were staggering, but Morrison felt no joy in the numbers. Good people had died today, including Captain Lisa Barnes and her entire crew aboard the Constitution. "Damage report," he said quietly. Lieutenant Sullivan looked up from her console, her face streaked with soot from a console fire that had been put out during the battle. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Main reactor is stable, but we're running on emergency power in several sections. Casualty reports are still coming in, but it looks like we lost 32 crew members." Morrison nodded, filing the information away. 32 families back on Earth would receive notification that their loved ones had died defending strangers in a distant star system. It was a price that human military forces had always been willing to pay, but it never got easier. What about liberty and freedom? Both ships are operational but heavily damaged. Captain Parker reports that his engines are running at 60% efficiency. Captain Hayes has lost 2 weapon batteries and her shield generators are offline. Through the view screen, Morrison could see the research station where this had all begun. The elegant crystalline structure floated peacefully in space, its surfaces still glowing with the soft blue light that the Villani seemed to prefer. It was hard to believe that less than an hour ago, it had been under threat from one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. "Incoming transmission from the research station," the communications officer announced. "Put it through." Dr. Zathara's face appeared on the main screen. The Villani scientist looked different than she had when Morrison first met her. There was still fear in her crystalline features, but now it was mixed with something else. Awe, gratitude, and perhaps a touch of understanding about what kind of beings the humans really were. "Commander Morrison," she began, her harmonic voice trembling slightly. We cannot find words to express our gratitude. What you and your people have done today, it defies belief. You saved not just our station, but our entire species." Morrison's expression softened slightly. This was why human ships patrolled the dangerous regions of space, not for glory or conquest, but for moments like this, when peaceful beings could continue to exist because someone was willing to stand between them and the darkness. "We did what anyone should do, Dr. Zathara. We protected those who needed protection. But at such a cost, she replied, her light dimming with sadness. We monitored your communications during the battle. We know about the ship that was lost, about the brave souls who gave their lives for strangers they had never met. The sacrifice, it is beyond our understanding. Behind Morrison, Chief Engineer Pete Johnson spoke up from his station. It's not beyond understanding, ma'am. It's just human nature. We protect those who can't protect themselves. That's what we do. Over the next several hours, the human ships worked to secure the area and begin repairs. Teams of engineers moved between the vessels, sharing resources and expertise to get the small fleet back to fighting condition. It was a process that had been refined through years of operating far from Earth's support infrastructure, and it proceeded with quiet efficiency. During this time, delegations from the Villani research station came aboard the human ships. They brought medical supplies that they hoped might help with the wounded, though their crystalline physiology made them uncertain about human biology. They also brought something more precious, their gratitude and their curiosity about the beings who had saved them. Elder Morthak was among the visitors to the Vengeance. The ancient Villani floated through the corridors with wonder, marveling at the ship's utilitarian design. Everything about the human vessel spoke of function over form, of a culture that had been shaped by conflict and hardship. Your technology is so different from ours, he observed as Morrison gave him a tour of the bridge. Everything here is designed for war, yet your people use it to protect peace. War and peace aren't opposites, Morrison replied, checking a damage report that a technician had handed him. Sometimes you need one to preserve the other. Our world taught us that lesson early. The Elder's crystalline form pulsed with curiosity. Your world, Earth. The galactic database is listed as forbidden territory. What is it like, this place that created beings such as yourselves? Morrison paused at one of the observation windows, looking out at the debris field where the Korthak fleet had met its end. How could he explain Earth to a being from a peaceful crystal world? How could he describe storms that could level cities, predators that hunted in packs, natural disasters that claimed millions of lives? How could he make a Villani understand what it was like to evolve on a planet where everything, from the weather to the wildlife, was actively trying to kill you? Earth is beautiful, he said finally, but it's also deadly. Our oceans can swallow ships without warning. Our weather can tear apart entire cities. Our animals evolved to hunt and kill anything that moves. And somehow in the middle of all that chaos and violence, humanity learned not just to survive but to work together. We learned that the only way to make it through the storm is to help each other. Elder Morthak considered this for a long moment. And this is why you came when we called for help. Because you understand what it means to face extinction. We understand what it means to fight for survival. And we understand that sometimes survival isn't just about you. It's about making sure the good things in the universe keep existing. While the repairs continued, word of the battle began to spread through the galaxy. The 3 surviving Korthak ships had jumped to the nearest Imperial outpost, where their panicked reports of the human victory were met with disbelief. 47 ships destroyed by 4 unknown vessels. It seemed impossible. But as more details emerged, a different picture began to form. The humans hadn't just won through superior numbers or technology. They had won through tactics, coordination, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for their cause. They fought like beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive against impossible odds. The news spread from the Korthak outpost to other systems. Traders carried the story to distant stations. Refugees whispered about the mysterious humans who had appeared from nowhere to destroy an entire invasion fleet. And slowly, across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear of aggressive empires began to look toward a small blue world in Sector 7G with new hope. 3 days after the battle, the human fleet was ready to depart. The repairs were complete, the wounded had been treated, and supply ships from Earth were already on their way to establish a permanent monitoring station in the system. The Villani would never again face the threat of conquest alone. As the human ships prepared to jump to hyperspace, Dr. Zethara requested one final meeting with Commander Morrison. She met him in the Vengeance's main docking bay, accompanied by several other Villani, who carried a crystalline object that seemed to sing with its own internal light. "Commander Morrison," she began, "before you leave, our people wish to present you with something. This is a resonance crystal from our homeworld. It carries within it the songs of our ancestors and the hopes of our children. We give it to you not just as payment for your services, but as a symbol of the bond between our species." Morrison accepted the crystal carefully. As his fingers touched its surface, he could hear faint melodies that seemed to speak of peace, of harmony, of a people who had never known war until now. "Thank you," he said simply. "We'll treasure this. And we will treasure the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy there are beings willing to stand against the darkness," Dr. Zethara replied. "The children in our schools will learn about this day. They will learn about the humans who came from the edge of space to save people they had never met." As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a grateful but forever changed Villani civilization, the legend of humanity's place in the galaxy began to take shape. They were the Deathworlders, beings forged in violence but dedicated to peace. They were the guardians who emerged from the forbidden zones to protect those who could not protect themselves. And across the galaxy, as word of their victory spread, other species began to send their own distress calls into the void, hoping that somewhere in the darkness the humans were listening and would come when needed. The age of human protection had begun.